War does not always begin with fire. Sometimes it begins with silence, a silence that feels wrong. In the Irish Sea, that silence almost started something the world could not stop. The watch floor was calm when the signal vanished. One moment, the Russian research vessel Yanter sat clearly on the tracking grid. Another moment it was gone. No distress call, no deviation notice, just absence. In waters layered with commercial traffic and international law, disappearance was not an error. It was a decision, and decisions like that do not happen by accident. British officers understood the danger immediately. The area Yanter had drifted toward was not just water. Beneath the waves lay transatlantic fiber optic cables, thin lines carrying the digital bloodstream of the Western world. Markets, military traffic, government communications, 97% of global data passed through places like this, and now a Russian vessel had gone quiet directly above it. Yanter reappeared only as noise. Radar clutter, reflections among fishing boats and cargo ships, its AES remained dark. To the untrained eye, it looked lost. To experienced naval operators, it looked deliberate. The ship was stationed, holding position without anchoring, drifting just enough to appear innocent. On paper, nothing illegal. In reality, the perfect posture for something unseen to descend. The name painted on Yanter's hull said research. NATO intelligence used another word, GUGI, Russia's deep, Sea Directorate. A unit built for work no one was meant to see. The ship carried advanced sonar, seismic sensors, and most concerning of all, the S-37 submersible, capable of diving deeper than any NATO submarine, equipped not for science, but for manipulation, for touching things that were never meant to be touched. International law froze the room. No shots could be fired. No aggressive maneuver allowed. If NATO acted too soon, Moscow would claim provocation. If they waited too long, the damage would be permanent and invisible until economies stalled and networks failed. This was the gray zone, where hesitation could be just as dangerous as force. Then, without announcement, the balance shifted. A U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon entered the battle space at altitude, silent, controlled, unreadable. No radio calls, no challenge. It did not approach Yanter directly. Instead, it began releasing sonobuoys in a wide, precise pattern. One by one, they splashed into the sea, forming an acoustic circle. An invisible fence. Yanter was no longer hunting. It was being observed. The Russian crew believed they were alone. They shut down engines. They waited. 30 minutes passed with no NATO radar emissions. No warnings. The silence convinced them they had succeeded. Orders were given. The winch engaged. Steel groaned. The S-37 slipped into the black water below. That was the moment the trap closed. Every sound the Russians tried to hide became evidence. The vibration of the winch, the churn of ballast pumps, the hum of propulsion far beneath the surface. The Poseidon did not interfere. It listened. In modern warfare, intelligence is captured, not demanded, and the Russians were transmitting everything without knowing it. HMS Iron Duke remained over the horizon, operating under full emission control. It did not need radar. The P-8 painted the picture. The shared data feed showed the submersible descending toward the cable bundle. Closer, slower, intent becoming unmistakable. Then the sound changed. Metal on metal, not current, not geology. Manipulator arms had made contact. At that instant, the gray zone ended. This was no longer suspicion. This was interference with strategic infrastructure. Hostile activity confirmed. The response was immediate, but not violent. The Poseidon descended just enough to be seen, low, deliberate. A message written in altitude and speed. We know, on Yanter's bridge the mood shifted. The Russian captain understood he had been exposed. Still, he gambled. Green laser beams cut through the night, aimed at sensors and cockpits, a familiar tactic. Intimidate, dazzle, force retreat without fingerprints. The Americans did not retreat. The P-8 pilot donned protective goggles and pushed the aircraft into a hard, controlled dive. The jet roared over Yanter at low altitude, its wake slamming the deck with raw aerodynamic force. At the same moment, HMS Iron Duke surged forward, crossing Yanter's bow at speed. The water rose, waves struck the hull. The crane holding the submersible shook violently. Physics took over. The sea became unworkable. Precision operations turned chaotic. Below the surface, the S-37 swayed on its tether, no longer stable. On deck, Russian technicians struggled to keep footing. The mission collapsed without a shot fired. Orders changed from proceed to recover. Fast, searchlights ignited. NATO vessels illuminated the scene. The submersible emerged like a confession hauled into the open. The Russian crew moved quickly now, not carefully. The operation was over, not because of force, but because control had been taken away. Silence returned to the Irish Sea, but it was different this time. No cables were cut. No lives were lost. Yet the message traveled faster than any data line beneath the waves. NATO did not need to escalate. It did not need to explain. The power had been displayed through restraint, awareness, and timing. In modern conflict, dominance does not announce itself, it waits, it watches, and when the line is crossed, it responds in ways that cannot be argued with. Some ships are not meant to be tested. War does not always announce itself with fire. Sometimes it begins with a signal going dark. In the Irish Sea, that silence almost triggered a conflict that would have reached far beyond the water. The ship vanished in plain sight. One moment it was there, moving through one of the busiest maritime corridors on Earth. The next it was gone, no distress call, no deviation warning, just a blank space where a Russian vessel had been seconds earlier. In waters governed by rules, that kind of disappearance was not a glitch. It was a move. At first, nothing looked wrong. Fishing boats crossed paths with cargo ships. Radar screens stayed crowded. But beneath the surface of that routine traffic lay something far more fragile than steel hulls or shipping lanes, fiber optic cables. Thin, silent lines stretched across the seabed, carrying the financial systems of entire nations, military command data, government communications, and the daily digital life of billions. If they were severed, markets would freeze before governments could even explain why. That was the real target. British naval officers understood this instantly. The Russian vessel, Yanter, had not disappeared randomly. It had slipped into the noise of civilian traffic and gone dark directly above a known cable junction. AAS switched off, speed reduced. Position held just enough to look accidental. On paper, nothing illegal. In reality, it was the textbook posture of a Gray's own operation. Yanter called itself a research ship. NATO used a different classification. It belonged to Russia's Deep Sea Intelligence Directorate, a unit built for operations that thrive on ambiguity. The ship carried advanced sonar, seabed mapping systems, and most importantly, the S-37 submersible. A machine capable of descending deeper than almost anything in NATO's fleet. Its mechanical arms were not designed for coral sampling. They were built to grab, manipulate, and cut. The timing made it worse. Only months earlier, unexplained damage had appeared on undersea cables in the Baltic Sea. No proof, no admission, just a familiar pattern, the same class of vessel, the same silence. In military intelligence, repetition is not coincidence. It is rehearsal, but knowing intent was not the same as proving it. International law locked the room in place. NATO could not fire, could not board, could not even aggressively maneuver without handing Moscow the narrative of provocation. Yet doing nothing carried its own danger. One cut in the wrong place could knock financial systems offline across continents. This was not a naval problem anymore. It was economic warfare conducted underwater. Then, quietly, the balance began to shift. A U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon entered the region at altitude. No radio chatter, no challenge calls. It did not race toward Yanter or circle it aggressively. Instead, it moved with patience, releasing sonobuoys in a wide, deliberate pattern. One splash after another, invisible to the naked eye, deadly to secrecy. The Russians believed they were still alone. Engines were shut down. The ship drifted naturally with the current. Time passed. No NATO radar lit up. No warning shots. The silence convinced them they had succeeded. Orders were given. The crane activated. Steel cables tightened. The S-37 slipped into the black water below. That was the moment the situation changed. The United States did not stop the launch, it allowed it, because in modern warfare, the sound of a secret operation is worth more than stopping it outright. Every vibration from the winch, every pump cycle, Every hum of the submersible systems was captured, recorded, and catalogued. The Russians thought they were collecting intelligence. In reality, they were giving it away. HMS Iron Duke remained over the horizon, operating under full emission control. It did not need radar. The Poseidon fed it everything, the shared picture sharpened by the second. The submersible was descending toward the cable field. Slower now, careful, purposeful, then the sound changed. Not water, not rock, metal striking metal. Manipulator arms had made contact with the cable housing. At that instant, the gray zone collapsed. Suspicion became confirmation. This was no longer presence. It was interference. The response came without panic. The P-8 descended just enough to be seen, not aggressive, not threatening, just visible. A silent message written in altitude and speed. "We know what you are doing." On Yanter's bridge, the atmosphere shifted. The Russian captain understood the exposure. Still, he tried to regain control the only way Gray's own operators know how. Green laser beams cut through the night. They were aimed at sensors, optics, cockpits, a non-lethal move but a dangerous one, a warning wrapped in plausible deniability. The expectation was simple: NATO would back off to avoid an accident. They did not. The Poseidon's pilot adjusted course, donned protective gear, and pushed the aircraft into a low, controlled pass. The jet thundered over Yanter, its aerodynamic wake slamming the deck with raw force. Almost simultaneously, HMS Iron Duke surged forward from silence, crossing the Russian ship's bow at speed. Water did the rest. The wake struck the hull, the deck pitched violently. The crane holding the submersible began to sway. Precision operations turned unstable. Below the surface, the S-37 twisted on its tether, no longer aligned, no longer safe. On deck, technicians struggled to remain upright. Physics had replaced diplomacy. Orders changed quickly. Retrieve the submersible, now. Searchlights came on. NATO assets illuminated the scene without saying a word. The S-37 emerged from the sea like evidence, dragged into daylight. Movements that had been calculated minutes earlier were now rushed and clumsy. The mission had failed. No shots were fired. No missiles launched. No explosions echoed across the water. Yet the outcome was absolute. The Irish Sea returned to quiet. The cables remained intact. Data continued to flow across oceans uninterrupted, but the message traveled faster than any signal beneath the seabed. The West had not escalated. It had controlled. This was not about sinking ships. It was about defending the systems that make modern life possible. The invisible infrastructure that holds economies together is now the front line. And those who attempt to touch it in silence should understand something clearly. Power today does not need to be loud. It only needs to be undeniable. War does not always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it starts with restraint. In the Irish Sea, one wrong move nearly dragged nuclear powers into a confrontation no one was ready to name. The danger did not come with warnings or speeches. It came quietly, wrapped in legality and silence. A single vessel, operating just within the rules, was enough to push the balance toward escalation. No missiles were armed, no alerts were issued. Yet every decision made in those hours carried consequences that could not be reversed. Russia understood the space it was operating in. This was the gray zone where uniforms blur, intentions hide behind paperwork, and actions are designed to stay just below the threshold of war. A ship labeled civilian moved through contested waters, its purpose disguised as research, its behavior deliberately unremarkable. On the surface, there was nothing to confront. Below it, however, lay something far more valuable than territory. The seabed carried the world's nervous system. Fiber optic cables that moved money, intelligence, military commands, and everyday communication between continents. Cut them, and economies would stumble before leaders could even explain why. Touch them and the act could be denied, delayed, debated. That ambiguity was the weapon. British forces saw the move for what it was. They did not react. They did not signal. They watched. Silence stretched longer than comfort allowed. The longer nothing happened, the more pressure built on everyone involved. On the Russian ship, confidence grew. No challenges, no patrols closing in, no consequences. The waiting game seemed to be working. Then, without announcement, the equation changed. High above the sea, unseen and unheard, an American P-8 Poseidon entered the battle space. It did not broadcast its presence. It did not race toward the target. It simply began to listen. Data flowed quietly between the aircraft and HMS Iron Duke, the British warship holding position beyond the horizon. Together, they stitched a picture so complete it left no gaps. The Russian crew believed they were the hunters. In reality, they had become the signal. Every adjustment of speed, every mechanical hum, every operational pause was captured. The mission designed to exploit NATO's restraint was now feeding NATO's intelligence systems in real time. The ship's secrecy was dissolving second by second. Still, no one moved to stop it. That restraint was deliberate, because the most powerful moment in modern conflict is not the first shot. It is the moment when intent is exposed beyond denial. That moment came when sensors detected contact below the surface. The submersible had reached the cable zone. Metal met infrastructure, not an accident, not a coincidence, confirmation. From that second forward, the balance of legitimacy shifted. NATO no longer watched a suspicious presence. It observed a hostile act. The advantage was no longer theoretical. It was legal, tactical, and psychological. The response did not come as an attack. The P-8 descended just enough to be seen. A shape against the sky, no radio calls, no threats, just presence, the kind that forces attention. On the Russian bridge, the change was immediate. Silence turned heavy. The crew understood what visibility meant. The illusion of anonymity was gone. Desperation followed confidence. Green laser beams cut upward through the air, aimed at sensors, cockpits, anything that could be disrupted without crossing into open violence. It was intimidation, designed to push NATO back into caution. It failed. The aircraft held course, calm, unmoved. Then the sea itself became the message. HMS Iron Duke surged forward, breaking its quiet posture and cutting across the Russian ship's bow. The maneuver was precise, legal, and unmistakably controlled. The wake slammed into the hull, sending force across the deck. Equipment shifted. Balance was lost. Operations below the surface became unstable. No weapons were fired, none were needed. The submersible's recovery turned frantic. What had been a measured mission minutes earlier became a scramble under observation. Searchlights illuminated the deck. The Poseidon circled overhead unhurried, documenting everything. There was no chaos, only exposure. Every second reinforced the same truth. This operation was over. The Russian ship withdrew slowly. Watched silent, when the sea finally returned to normal, nothing appeared changed. Ships continued their routes. Data continued to move across oceans. Markets never paused. Headlines never fully formed. Yet something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. This was not a victory measured in wreckage or casualties. It was dominance demonstrated through discipline. NATO did not escalate. It did not retreat. It controlled. It showed that restraint, when backed by awareness and capability, is not weakness. It is leverage. The lesson was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. The future of conflict will not always be loud. It will be fought over systems people never see, in spaces where legality and force overlap. And those who try to exploit silence may find themselves overwhelmed by it. Because in modern warfare, the most dangerous power is the one that doesn't need to announce itself.